start with the next chapter. We're done with digestion. We're moving on to the urinary system. Moving on. Urinary. Well, we're going to spend most of the time talking about the kidneys. So this picture shows you the abdominal cavity with the digestive viscera removed so you can get a view of the overall system. So the basic idea of the urinary system is to study how the kidneys produce urine. So basically you produce urine by filtering the blood plasma. Kidneys filter the blood plasma producing filtrate. So this term filtrate, it's the filtered plasma, it's fluid. Filtrate, which is modified, basically becomes what we call urine. The organ pictures there are the I'll say structures including you have the kidneys. The knees, they actually produce the urine. And then the other structures are just kind of to funnel the urine down to store in the bladder. So the tube that goes from the kidneys down to the urinary bladder, this tube that carries it from there to there, are the ureters. Muscular tubes that transfer urine from kidney to bladder. You get down to the bladder on the bottom of the picture there. The full name is urinary bladder. The urinary bladder is just a holding chamber for the urine. Its capacity is, you can hold about a liter, not most. It would be very painful. You have to go really bad. You start to feel it at about 200 mLs. Well, anyways, you hold urine, and when you void your bladder, number 4, you void, you go through the urethra. The urethra will excrete urine to the outside world. So the key structures of the urinary system: kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra, and the key function is excretion. You're filtering your plasma, and you filter things out, okay? And you excrete it in the urine. All of these structures are basically retroperitoneal. You can't really tell that from the picture. Retroperitoneal. And the kidneys themselves, they're difficult to find in the body cavity. I mean, you have to kind of push the digestive viscera aside. They're held in place on the back body wall by the renal fascia. They're not just hanging there in space, but the renal fascia really kind of seals them on the back body wall very well. So let me erase this now. What I do when I look for it in a cadaver, I palpate the 12th rib. Because I know they're right around there. Then I just kind of look at the back, and you can't see the kidneys like that. I kind of have to carefully tear with, I usually use my hands, just kind of tear through the fatty renal fascia. I'll describe that as the tissue that holds kidney in place, holds kidneys in place. I tear through that, then I can get to the kidney and I can see it like that, and I can pop it out, and I have to cut different structures there to get it out. Here's a model just showing you how we call it the freestanding urinary model. Okay, and they're just hanging out there. And when we do a kidney dissection, when I remove from a body cavity, I got to cut three things. I got to cut the ureter, the renal artery and vein. So these three structures are the structures you should be able to identify in the renal hilum. This is what the kidney will look like when we do the organ dissection. So differentiate renal fascia, which holds it in place on the back body wall, from renal capsule. Fibrous capsule on the kidney. The fibrous capsule, it wraps the kidney, but it doesn't hold it in place on the back body wall. Renal hilum. You know that. Where things enter and exit. Be able to identify renal artery and vein. Be able to identify renal pelvis, which narrows into the ureter. That's the urine carrying structure. The renal artery is supplying the blood that's being filtered. The renal vein will take all the things out. Okay, so that's the basic anatomy. It's a pretty simple organ to look at. Now on top there is the adrenal gland. I'm not going to teach that because I already did for endocrine. They call it suprarenal gland here. So in terms of anatomy, it's not much to look at. It's a kidney-shaped organ. Now the functions I had on the first slide, I'm going to go back to it. This slide here. Conserves, regulates, acid-base balance, endocrine function, excretion. So that's a lot of information there. Just to give you an overview of everything we're going to talk about. Kidney function, because it filters your blood so many times a day, you don't want to lose all of those valuable, nutritious things in the blood to the urine. So you try to conserve most of those things. So kidney functions, overview. Quote unquote, conserves nutrients. Now, really what you want to understand is how it reabsorbs things from the filtrate and puts it back into the blood. So that's the key word for you. It conserves nutrients by reabsorption of nutrients. Reabsorption means you remove it from the filtrate, and you put it back into the blood so you don't lose it to the urine, hence you conserve it. I'll say remove from filtrate, remove, say, substance X, whatever it is. Put back in the blood. You don't lose it to the urine, you conserve it. You want to excrete the waste products, not the nutrients your body needs. So let's say the substance X is glucose. You first absorb it from the intestinal capillaries from your diet. Then it's filtered by the kidney. Then you reabsorb it from the kidney so you don't lose it to the urine. You keep it in the blood. So it enters through the renal artery. It comes back out the renal vein, right? Not down the ureter. You're supposed to reabsorb 100% of your glucose. Okay, well, anyways, that's what conserves means. That's the first function. The second function there is It regulates water and electrolytes. And we already talked about this. Do you remember discussing ADH and aldosterone? If the answer is yes, great. If it's not, go back and look it up. Aldosterone. Now I'll talk about it again later, but just give you a heads up. Aldosterone. That was test number 1. Remember that? Endocrine. We did talk about that. Well, anyways, that's kind of why we say it helps regulate water and electrolytes. You help conserve like sodium and water. Critical in acid-base balance. So one thing that the kidney can do is it can excrete hydrogen ions and reabsorb bicarbonate, the base. Let's say it does that. How is that going to affect the pH of the blood? I want you to think about that. You're getting rid of the proton, you're reabsorbing the base. Wouldn't that increase the pH? Yes. Just making sure you're confident about that. So you would want to do that if pH was getting too low. That would help compensate for an acidosis. Compensate for acidosis. And the reverse is true. If pH is getting too high, you could lower it by flipping that, but we'll get into that. So I just want you to know, because the kidney's ability to alter the hydrogen ions and bicarbonate, you can affect pH and help regulate it. The other thing there is endocrine function. Let's see. Endocrine function is, well, actually I talked about that. Renin, and we're studying the RAS mechanism. Renin is from the kidney, and so is EPO. Both of those things will help increase or maintain blood pressure. EPO will increase your CRIT. Renin is part of that renin, angiotensinogen, aldosterone system. I'll talk about those again, okay, because they're here again. So some things get repeated in ANP, and well, renin is definitely one of those things that comes up a few times. So that's why the endocrine, that's why the kidneys participate in endocrine function. Excretion I already mentioned. All right, you excrete urine. Defecation technically is not excretion. Defecation are things that were never absorbed into your body. They just passed right through you in the fecal matter. Okay. But when you excrete something, it was filtered out of your blood. It was in your blood, and your kidneys filtered it out. That's true excretion. Get it out of your body. So we've talked about that. Let's get to this part where you look at the smallest functional unit of the kidney. This is called the nephron. Kidney functions can be best understood by studying at the nephron level. So whenever you see the term renal or nephros, those refer to kidney. So the term nephron, one's Latin, one's Greek. I can't remember what's what, but nephron refers to this smallest functional unit of the kidney. So if you just study the nephron, you basically know how the whole kidney works. Smallest functional unit of the kidney. And the basic processes of the nephron are shown with those colored arrows. The first arrow is filtration, that red arrow. You filter the blood plasma, you modify the filtrate, and you got urine. So you filter right there. This special capillary in the kidney is called the glomerulus, and that's where the filtration function occurs. That's your little molecular filter. So you got like 1 million of these nephron per kidney, which means you have about 1 million glomeruli per kidney. So the process of filtration occurs at glomerulus. The term glomer means ball of yarn. It's a very interesting capillary set because, well, there's no gas exchange. There's just filtration. And also, no gas exchange. That's why it's like red and it kind of like stays red, blood stays red. And also you have a capsule around it to catch all the fluid that's been filtered. That's called the Bowman's capsule there. Bowman's capsule. Surrounding this ball of yarn capillary bed. Surrounded by Bowman's capsule. Catches all the filtrate. So when you filter the plasma, you call it filtrate after it's been filtered. Filtered plasma, blood plasma, of course, called filtrate. And that's what you modify to produce urine at the end. So, as you move along, you have the nephron, you have these different processes: secretion, reabsorption, excretion. So, just by studying the figure, you could deduce that reabsorption, like I already said, you conserve it. You don't lose the urine. You move it from the lumen of the nephron back to the blood. That's what it's showing you with each of those green arrows. For example, right here, it's been filtered, but then you remove it from the lumen back into this paratubular capillary. So the movement is from lumen of the nephron to blood. And the reverse is true for secretion. You secrete from blood into the lumen. And if that thing that is secreted is not later reabsorbed, it's then excreted. If not later reabsorbed, it's excreted. Now, I already defined excreted, but those are the processes: excreted, secretion, reabsorb, filtration. Okay. There's an analogy that's given. It's like we'll get a donation box going at my house. Now I'm going to take it to the Salvation Army or something. But whenever we do that, I'm always too lazy to take it the day we fill the box. And I leave it in the garage for like weeks. And so it sits there in the garage, all this stuff. And well, we're only going to donate what you can fit in this box. So for example, I can't fit my big old TV in there. I can only fit what's in the box. So what process does that match up with, where you only can donate things that fit into the box? Filtration. Okay, I can donate small things that fit in the box. All of my, like little Chuck E. Cheese prizes to bring home, like literally garbage as soon as it makes it through the front door. Like they're all like couch under the sofa, and I just grab it and I just throw it in there, and I just either throw it away, or if it's good enough, I'll donate it. Okay? And all the kids' old toys that they don't play with, I put it in the box, I fill the box up, and then I leave it in my garage. And as people walk past and my kids say, hey, I want that, and they grab it out and they take it back into the house. What does that symbolize? Reabsorption, and you take it back. But then let's say, it's like, no, you can't keep it, and I throw it back in the donation box. That's like secretion. Right? So you just modify that box for the next 2 weeks. Things go in, things go out, things go in, things go out. Secretion, reabsorption. Then when I actually drive it to Goodwill and I give it to them, that's it. And what does that symbolize? Excretion. You're done. Okay? You just urinate it out of your body, and that's it. Now, so those are the processes. The nephron parts we should go through too. It starts with the Bowman's capsule surrounding the glomeruli. Nephron Parts at the Bowman's capsule. That's a kind of an older term. Books may now call it the renal capsule. I still hold on to the Bowman's capsule. That's the thing surrounding glomerulus. But you can see it's continuous that with that first part of the tube. They call it the proximal tubule. The full name is proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal convoluted tubule, PCT. You can see that there's this nephron loop. I still call it the loop of Henle. Proximal tubule, loop of Henle. Goes down and up. It's a hairpin loop. Loop of Henle. That's continuous with the distal tubule. The full name is distal convoluted tubule. DCT. And that dumps into what's called the collecting duct, that last tube there. And once you're at the end of the collecting duct, you're done modifying. And that's the first place you have urine. Now, I don't want you to think that it's a 1-to-1 ratio. It's not like you have one collecting duct per one nephron. It's called collecting duct. It's collecting from many nephron. Okay. But the collecting duct is the last place to modify the filtrate. Collecting duct. So I'll kind of put it in parentheses. I mean, some histologists or books, they don't include the collecting duct as part of the nephron because many dump into it, but I'll just kind of list it there as part of it in parentheses. Yeah. Anyways, those are the basic parts of the nephron. To take a macro view at the kidney, this is a good picture to study when you're doing your kidney dissection. I believe we're doing it the Monday after Thanksgiving weekend. Okay. And this is what you'll do. You'll just get it and cut it in half and just kind of like lay it open. And the basic regions of the kidney you should be able to identify are, call this kidney regions. The outer region, it's called the cortex. Let me see if I can trace over this, make it a little bit more clear. I'll say the outer part we're kind of roughly tracing in red. That's the renal cortex. The inner part is the renal medulla, but they're arranged in these lobules shaped like pyramids. Let me trace a couple here. Here's one big one down here. Renal pyramid. Here's another one. I won't trace them all, but just give you a, this is the thing I'm talking about. I tend to call them medullary pyramids. Here they call them renal pyramid, same thing. It's the inner lobe part. Medullary pyramid. Remember, in anatomy, cortex always means the outer part. Medulla always means the inner part. Now, in between the pyramids are these regions of, like here, renal column, in between the pyramids, or I guess here. So those regions in between the pyramids are called renal columns. Usually they're just spaces for blood vessels. Renal columns. There are spaces where there's basically nothing but fat and blood vessels. For example, this big space here, or this space here, or this space here. Those spaces are called the renal sinus. Sinus means empty space, renal sinus. Basically, you have maybe some blood vessels. Usually, I don't see blood vessels there, although they're there, they're illustrated. Usually, they're obscured by all the fat you see there. That's probably what you'll see in your kidney, a bunch of fat. All right, so, you know, the pyramid, at the tip of a pyramid, that's like the first place you have urine. That's where the collecting ducts terminate. So, it was renal papilla. So here, the terms, yeah, right here. They point right to there. Okay, that's the renal papilla. That's the first place you have urine. So I'll list it here too. Renal papilla. It's the tip of the pyramid. So maybe I should kind of list it here too. Renal papilla. First place you got urine. So you need a collection system to collect this made urine, and those are the calyces. So for example, these little cups, like I'll kind of trace one here. Like that one there in purple, or say this one here. Okay, you call this structure a minor calyx. That's kind of collecting the urine from one pyramid. Minor calyx. I'm spelling it different than the picture. They use an L-I-X. More typically, I see it spelled L-Y-X. So we're going to go with the more common thing there. Collect urine. That's its function. Well, two minor calyces will merge to form into a major calyx. And then the major calyces will merge to form one renal pelvis. Which is just the proximal wide part of the ureter. So the renal pelvis is continuous with ureter. So to look at those structures here on this picture, for example, where I put the stars, remember what I called that? The minor or the major? Minor. That's the minor. But look at like all these two here. What if I put the label in here? What are you going to call it? I will call that major because it's like it's got a few minors draining into it. I'm going to put it right around here for pelvis. But if I kind of go out of the kidney down here somewhere, I'm going for ureter. Okay. So that's just the collection system for the urine. So another analogy is usually given for this structure. It's like if you get a swimming pool installed in your backyard and you dig a big hole in the ground, just a big muddy hole would represent the renal sinus. And then when you kind of line it with cement or fiberglass, those represent like, say, the calyx. And then you put water in the pool, I guess that's like the urine, right? But anyways, that's a good slide to study when you do your dissection. You'll be able just to kind of stick pins in all the structures that I expect you to show me on your kidney. I think we get them from sheep or pig. I'm not sure where we ordered from this time. There's a model we have in the room. That's the left kidney. There's like 6 of them on the shelf back here. You can study that during the lab.
Professor Juan.
Yeah.
I went over your lab practical study guide and I didn't see the medullary pyramids. Would it be called something else?
I would look for renal pyramid.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and we can go over it and I'll show you which term it's going to be. Let's talk about the arterial blood supply to the kidney. Of course, it's the renal artery, but then there's all these branchings inside the kidney. Okay, so it starts off with renal artery. the big one. The renal artery is a direct branch of abdominal aorta. There it is right there. And you can see these first branches that come off and go to a segment of the kidney, they're all called something segmental. You don't have to know like if it's inferior or anterior inferior or anterior superior. Let's just call them all, that first branch, call them all segmental. Segmental arteries. And let's follow one segmental artery to see where it branches again. Let's follow this one here. There's a segmental. When it branches right there, those branches go in between the lobes, in between the pyramids. And those are called interlobar arteries, the next branch. Then let's follow the interlobars. They branch and they go up and over. When they arc over the border between cortex and medulla, they're called arcuate arteries. Arcuate arteries have these tiny little branches, and so I kind of did some zoom-ins here. Like this is a pretty good one to look at. Okay, let's follow it again. Here's a renal artery. This first branch, segmental, interlobar. When it branches here, let's follow this one, arcuate. And then when it goes over the top, it gives all of these arteries that radiate into the cortex. So they're either called interlobular arteries or cortical radiate arteries. Both of those terms are used. So arcuate. I tend to use interlobular arteries, but they're also called cortical radiate arteries. So either or. And if you go even closer in, it's starting to get a little pixelated there, but let's follow it again. Arcuate, interlobular, these little branches, these look like little Christmas trees, but the branches coming off, those are the smallest arteries, and they're called the afferent arterioles, and those will go directly to the glomerular capillaries. So next branch coming off, afferent arteriole, and that goes right to glomerulus. Well, they don't show glomerulus, but if I could kind of draw one in. Okay, let's see here. Let's go. There's afferent arteriole. What if I put like a little ball in your arm right there? See, that's my glomerulus. That's where it would be on that picture. I want you to know how the nephron is associated with this picture. Glomerulus. And then remember the capsule around it there? How about I use green this time? Put a little capsule around that. We call that the Bowman's capsule around the glomerulus to catch all the filtrate. The first part of the tubule is the PCT. PCT. Then the nephron loop will extend down into the medulla. Loop of Henle. Then the DCT comes after that. Just kind of draw it in there. This is not 100% accurate, but you get the idea. DCT. And the DCT dumps into another collecting duct. I'll use block again. The collecting duct extends up into the cortex. It goes all the way down the medulla to the tip, to the medullary pyramid. So that second black line I drew was collecting duct. So from this little exercise, what we learned is that these first three, those are in the renal cortex. Loop of Henle, well, in this example, basically it's in medulla. DCT, cortex, renal cortex. The collecting duct extends cortex all the way down in the medulla, so it's really in both. Renal cortex and medulla. Just so you kind of know the basic idea of where these parts are in the overall gross anatomy of the kidney. So any questions on those basic nephron parts? We're going to look at some other pictures. Okay, if you look at the real histology there, what do you think the G stands for? Glomerulus. Doesn't it look like a ball of yarn? It really does. It's a capillary bed. It performs filtration. It looks like a ball of yarn to me. What do you think the A stands for? Afferent arterial. Afferent arterial. There's the letter I, referring to this blood vessel. What do you think that stands for? Interlobular artery. There's a PT up there. You got to know that. I didn't mention that yet. That stands for the peritubular capillaries. So in the kidneys, it gets a little confusing. There's 3 different capillary beds you got to keep track of. Let me just list them here. I already listed one, glomerulus. The other 2 are peritubular capillaries, PT for short, and vasa recta is the third one. All 3 of those are considered capillaries. Now the first one, glomerulus, no gas exchange, but you do see gas exchange in the other 2. Okay. Here's a model of these things, and I always use the arcuate artery and vein as a landmark because I know that's kind of bordering cortex medulla. So if I see it right here, arcuate artery and vein, what's below it? Cortex or medulla? Medulla. And above it is cortex. And that's where I have all my things, right? All my little goodies like, well, what this model does, they separate the blood supply from the nephron things. Here are the nephron things, there's the blood supply. So for example, if that's arcuate artery, which one's that? Interlobular. What are the little branches of the Christmas tree called again? Afferent arterial. The little ornaments there? Glomerulus. Okay. This is PT, peritubular capillary. There's vasa recta. Rectus means straight vessels. Sometimes they're modeled that way. Okay. So that's blood supply things. Here's nephron things. That's the Bowman's capsule. Don't call it glomerulus because you can't see it, but know that the glomerulus is inside. Then, proximal convoluted tubule, PCT, loop of Henle, down and up. And then notice how the DCT It always ends up right around the beginning. DCT, you follow that to the collecting duct, the white structure. Here's a picture of a kidney. Is that cortex or medulla? See if you're waking up here. Medulla. Here's cortex. So you can see the interlobar, arcuate, interlobular arteries. There's a minor calyx, there's a major calyx. But look at that thing right there. If you were to look at the edge of that head on, the renal papilla, it would look like a little shower nozzle. And what comes out of there? Urine. It's the first place you got urine. A little shower of urine there. Okay, let's look at this kidney. This kidney model, our left kidney, it's a little blurry, but you can make out our arcuate artery and vein. That's my landmark. So again, what's below it? Medulla, and above it is cortex. So you can make out the interlobular artery and vein. And you can even make out, I don't know if you can see barely a little bit of red and blue in there. That's peritubular capillary up there. But down there in the medulla, see like the little red and blue lines they got going on? They're trying to show you vasa recta in the medulla. You can even see the cup, the minor calyx. And you can even see the nephron parts right there. There's the proximal convoluted tubule. There's the loop of Henle, hairpin loop. This is the DCT right before the collecting duct, all the way down there. So here's just an outline of all the blood supply. And I did kind of trace it all the way to the glomerulus, but I did not kind of talk about what comes after. What comes after is kind of odd. After the capillary bed, it's not a vein, it's another artery, an arteriole. And that efferent arteriole will then feed into either peritubular or vasa recta, and that's where you get the gas exchange from purple to blue. And the veins on the way out have all the same names as the arteries, so they make it easy for you. So the blood supply is interacting with the nephron. And what I didn't mention before, there are two kinds of nephrons categorized by length, long and short. Let's see here. So erase this. So I have them here, cortical nephron. Well, you tell me, which one looks shorter? Cortical or juxtamedullary? Corticals are shorter. Look how long the loop of Henle is on the other one. Well, anyways, okay, so cortical, so nephrons, categorized, based on length. Short ones are called the cortical nephrons because the loop of Henle is shorter. Okay. If you look at the long ones, the juxtamedullary, they have long loop of Henle, loops of Henle. Long loops, and that's important to note. Those longer loops, they make it more effective for concentrating urine. You can pull more water out of the filtrate, concentrating the urine. More effective at concentrating urine. Turns out the juxtamedullary nephrons, they only account for about 15% of all nephrons, but they have the important job of, because of those long loops, they can concentrate the urine better. What I'm not telling you is the medulla has this salt gradient, and when you put this long loop into a salt gradient, it's easier to pull out water by rules of osmosis. So I'll talk more about that later. And so for this longer one, that's the vasa recta, that purple. So associate vasa recta with these ones. The PT, associate that one with the cortical ones. But write it out, paratubular, tubular capillaries. And also notice how it goes from red to purple to blue. You see that? Here, identify. Glomerulus. What color is that? Red. Now, when it goes afferent arterial, glomerulus, efferent arterial. When it goes down to the vasa recta, see how it turns purple? Then it goes back to the blue for the symbolizing the gas exchange. The same thing right here. Afferent arterial going in, glomerulus, efferent arterial going out to paratubular capillary. It changes to purple and back to blue. So, gas exchange at those other two capillary beds. Here are those three capillary beds shown here. I just kind of point to them. But let's kind of like take a walk through the nephron, looking at things more closely. For example, the first part with the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus, that's actually called the renal corpuscle. Let me write this term on the board. So whenever you see this term renal corpuscle, it's referring to this. What you see there is the Bowman's capsule surrounding glomerulus. Bowman's capsule surrounding glomerulus. Well, it's more detailed here. What we see here is that the Bowman's capsule is bilayered. Okay. Number one, that's the outer layer. We call it the parietal layer of Bowman's capsule. What they're showing you is, where I have the number one, that it's a simple squamous ET, flat cells, simple squamous ET. They basically have the capsule function. They're catching all the filtrates. Simple squamous ET. Capsule function. Capsule. Meaning you catch all the filtrate. You don't let it go elsewhere. Right, that's the parietal layer. Now that inner part, the visceral layer, that's the filter part of the glomerulus. Visceral layer. It's composed of these podocyte cells. Composed of podocytes. Now pod means foot. So these podocytes have these, look at the picture there, those foot processes, right? There's the nuke. There are all these little feet, and they call them feet, foot processes. So I'll say podocytes with foot processes. Those foot processes create filtration slits. They make the glomerulus a very good filter. So those slits make for a good filter. What's a good filter? Well, you don't let everything through the filter, right? You filter out all the things you want to keep in the blood. You only filter very small molecules and fluids. That's a good filter. You don't lose everything through it. So those slits are very good filters. So that's the parietal and the visceral layer for the podocytes. You need to know that. And let's look at the pictures here. So you got 2 layers. There's a better picture. On the left, they cut it open so you can see the anatomy a little better, or the histology. So what you got here, afferent arterial, blood coming in, there's the arrow, blood going out, efferent arterial. So the blood that actually flows through the capillaries, you can see by the size, the red blood cells are too big to be filtered. So they'll remain in the blood. You only filter plasma. You can see number 1, parietal layer, number 2, visceral layer, they're intimate with the glomerular capillaries. And so these terms come about, vascular pole and tubular pole, when you look at this corpuscle structure. So number 1 on this figure, we call this juxtaglomerular complex. Well, anyway, on this slide, the number 1, I want you to call that the vascular pole. The vascular pole. Because at that side, you'll notice you can see the afferent and the efferent arterial. Be able to identify afferent arterial, efferent arterial. And the other side, number 2, that's the tubular pole. Tubular. Well, it's technically the PCT. But the reason why we kind of use these pole terms like North Pole, South Pole, right? Opposite ends, right? And it's unusual, right? Because usually for a capillary, the normal procedure is arterial, capillary, vein. But there's no vein on the other side. There's this tubular pole, and it's like, it doesn't even go artery, capillary, vein. It's like, that's another arterial. So it goes arterial, capillary, arterial. That's very unusual, that arrangement. All right. The other thing that's weird is this is the only spot in the body where I know where you have a capillary bed surrounded by a capsule. Okay, that's odd too. But remember, the function is to produce urine, so you want to filter all the plasma and then modify it. So that's why you need the capsule. Now that vascular pole, tubular pole, can really be a nice clue when you study pictures like this, which are confusing to look at. So what I always do is I always start there and identify the vascular pole, then so that I know the other side is the tubular pole, and I just follow the tube. PCT. Down here, loop of Henle, kind of turns backwards like that, goes up. Now it's DCT. The DCT always passes back at the beginning by the vascular pole and then into the collecting duct. So I always do that. And no matter what you're looking at, if you start with vascular pole, the other side is tubular pole. That's PCT, all this. You can see why it's proximal convoluted tubule. It goes down here. Now what is this? Our loop. Go back up. Now it's DCT, and it's always going to pass by the vascular pole. It always does that. Okay, and then it goes into the collecting duct there. So when you look at things, you need something to figure out to know what you're looking for. For example, if we kind of look at this picture here, if you do a close-up, here's my landmark, arcuate, artery, and vein. And so I know below it it's medulla, and above it it's cortex. there's glomerulus, there's Bowman's capsule. If I follow my interlobular artery, if I follow it in this way, that's the afferent arteriole. You filter stuff, then that's the efferent arteriole. Therefore, which capillary is this? PT, peritubular capillary. Let's do this one. Interlobular artery, afferent, efferent arteriole, going down to what? Vasa recta. This one's vasa recta. Peritubular is up here. Vasa recta is down there. Okay, let's follow the nephron parts. Here's glomerulus. There's the vascular pole. There's the tubular pole. So I know that's the PCT. There's the nephron loop. There's the DCT. It always passes by the vascular pole before it dumps into the collecting duct on down there. Here's a different one showing you the same thing. Like, for example, if I just point to that, could you identify it? It's the efferent. How do you know it's not afferent? Well, the afferent is a direct branch off interlobular. That's how you can tell. There's my landmark. That's arcuate artery and vein. But let's follow the nephron. There's my Bowman's capsule. And there's my proximal convoluted tubule going down into the loop of Henle. When it goes back up, it's DCT. It always passes by close to here. The DCT will then dump into collecting duct. What are these blood vessels down here? That's the vasa recta, but up here, that's the PT. Here it is labeled. This one you got to turn your head to the side. Well, there's my landmark 7 and 8. That's my arcuate artery and vein. So what do you think is on this side? Cortex or medulla? This is medulla, and on the other side is cortex there. So if you just follow the numbers, one, the little green thing is the Bowman's capsule. Number 2 and 3, what do you think? Is 2 afferent or efferent? Afferent. Efferent. Number 4, it's purple. Well, it's DCT. Okay. And the 5, see how there's more of 5 than 4? The proximal convoluted tubule, it's like there's more of it. Okay, so once again, DCT, 5, PCT, 6, collecting duct, 7, oh, I did 7 and 8 already, 9, interlobular artery, 10, interlobular vein, 11. Okay, that's the loop of Henle, but what I did was, I'm going to change that leader line, so 11 points down to here. Do you see how the loop of Henle has this thin part that descends? And then there's a thick part that ascends. That 12 is pointing to. I want you to know this thin part and this thick part. So that will be 11 and 12. But that's loop of Henle, 11 and 12. 13 is which capillary? Vasa recta. Okay. So, I mean, I could point to here. I could point to any of this. All of this is vasa recta, all of it. They just happen to label this one thing. So if 13 is vasa recta, what's 14? Going from red to blue. Peritubular capillary. There's a black one that's labeled, so you can kind of like study that model. That model is like super old. It's heavy. It's on one of our shelves over there. Just don't drop it. It's gonna crack. It'd be like the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments will just break. The thing's made out of some weird porous thing. I want to talk about the glomerular filtration in more detail. So it filters, but how? The filtrate of the filtered plasma is the filtration of the blood, specifically the blood plasma. It's going to contain all the plasma components except proteins which are too large to make it through the filter. So you can secrete things into the filtrate, but if they're not being absorbed, they're excreted later on. So I didn't mention that earlier. And what you want to think of that the urine contains are all the excreted nitrogenous waste products the body does not need, like creatine, urea, uric acid. These are the nitrogenous waste products that they usually refer to. All right, so the filtration function, you got to understand the filtration membrane. And that can be understood by just looking at this picture here. We looked at that before, but if you take a close-up look at a glomerular capillary, you can see there's all these fenestrations or pores in it. That allows the the plasma to easily be filtered out. So let's call this filtration membrane. The glomerular capillaries have fenestrations. It's holy, it's full of pores that allow the fluid plasma to filter out. However, you want to limit that. You don't want to lose a lot of nutritious things by filtering everything out. And so the filtration slits by the visceral layer, the Bowman's capsule, the podocytes, they kind of limit the filtration. That makes you a better filter. You're more selective. So think about the fenestrations along with the filtration slits. Here's a diagram of how they're all kind of glued together. So what you're looking at that picture is a podocyte with all these foot processes. So a big old podocyte. There's my foot process there. So that's one podocyte. So when you look at this picture, these are the podocytes, right? But imagine these are all like just one cell. Remember when I first studied this, I thought each of these was an individual cell. That's not the case. They're just the foot process, which is a part of the cell. Now, the little space between the feet, that's your slit. That's your filtration slit right there. Right there, filtration slit. And it's been measured, like 14 nanometers, okay? So it's like, we know about it. There's a lot of stuff I'm not teaching here. There's a lot of proteins that have been identified within that slit, but we're not going to talk about that. We'll just know that there's a slit that's about 14 nanometers wide. Okay, then you have this basement membrane that glues it to the endothelial cells of the glomerulus. So I'll put another layer for BM, basement membrane. It's got a lot of collagen, a lot of proteins. Proteins usually have a negative charge. Well, anyways, that's basement membrane. That will help adhere the podocytes to the glomerular endothelial cells. Glomerular endothelial cells. Well, anyways, that gap right here, those are what I call the fenestrations. And those have been measured to be something like 70 nanometers. It's a much bigger hole. That's why you need the slits to limit what's filtered. So I'll just draw a line from there to there. It's 70 nanometers. Okay, well, anyways, this kind of arrangement, this is the filtration membrane, those three things. So the 1, 2, 3 is, well, let me use black. 1, the filtration slit of the foot process. 2, the basement membrane. And then 3, a blood vessel. So when plasma is filtered, on this figure it's going up, right? So you make it through the pore, but then you got to make it through the slit. So the filtration membrane it favors the filtration of, well, I'll say this, it filters based upon number one, size. Well, it favors the filtration of small things, right? Small things, not large things, can make it through. And also charge. Because the basement membrane, proteins tend to have a negative charge, it favors things that are small and positively charged. Favors positive. However, there are negative molecules that do make it through, but that's the basic idea of how it's going to filter things. I think the picture is way better than the drawings. Let's look at the glomerular capillary from the inside so you can see the fenestrations. It's peppered with all these little holes. I showed this to you before when I taught the different capillaries. Continuous, fenestrated, sinusoidal. This is fenestrated. If you look at the glomerular capillary from the outside, you can see the podocyte right there. Okay, and you can see all these little foot processes and the little slits in between these little finger-like things of the foot processes. Those are the slits that are 14 nanometers. So this shows the fenestrations, which are 70. I think the picture is very effective at showing you why the glomerulus is a good filter. So I even asked that question on the next slide. Why is it a good filter? Well, qualitatively, the kidneys, glomerular capillaries, they filter blood plasma just like anything else. But quantitatively, I think that's the difference maker. They filter something like 180 liters of filtrate every day. Regular capillary beds, maybe 2 to 4. So think about those renal arteries pumping all that blood to like 1 million glomeruli in each kidney. What is your entire blood volume? Something like 5 or 6 liters. Now only half of that is plasma. So maybe 2.5, 3 liters. So think about that. You're putting through your blood like 70 times a day. And that's a real effective filtration mechanism. If you have toxins in your blood and you're filtering the blood 70 times a day, you're going to filter it out. So let's think about the pressure it takes to push blood through those little glomerular capillaries. And so these pressures I want you to note. They call this net filtration pressure. Well, calculated it. Well, I'll just call it NFP, net filtration pressure. Let's remember that mean arterial pressure is 93 millimeters of mercury. In normal capillaries, the pressure drops to something like 35 millimeters of mercury. In the kidney, it's much higher. So in the kidney, when you get to the glomerular capillary, well, that term HPGC, right there, it's down there too. What you're doing to calculate it is you calculate the outward pressures, but you subtract the pressures against it, the inward pressures. Okay? So out minus in. So NFP equals HPGC. That stands for the hydrostatic pressure glomerular capillaries. That's calculated to be something like 55 millimeters of mercury. You subtract that from the inward pressures, and there's 2 of them. One is they call OPGC, that second arrow. OPGC. That's the the oncotic or osmotic pressure of the blood. That is the pressure that's retaining fluids in the blood, and that's calculated to be something like 30 millimeters of mercury. You add that to the other inward pressure. It's the capsular pressure. They call it HPCS, the capsular pressure. This capsule is fluid filled. So when you're trying to push fluid into something that's fluid filled, there's some resistance there. So that's the HPCS. And that's about 15-ish. So hopefully the 55 is greater to these opposing pressures. And it is. Let's just do the math. 55 millimeters mercury minus 45. Outward minus inward pressures. You get a net of 10. NFP, 10 millimeters mercury. So you have enough to force fluids out. And so, well, that's the mathematical calculation in terms of just, okay, you have to force out. But I mean, really what you're doing is you're generating all of that filtrate 70 times a day. You're filtering your blood. That's what that really means. That's enough pressure to accomplish that. And so I spend a little time talking about why that number is higher compared to other capillary beds. You have to consider, again, the weird arrangement where you have arterial, capillary, arterial, versus other capillary beds where it's like arterial, capillary, vein. So again, why is this 55 higher in the glomerulus compared to other places? Glomerulus, regular capillary. Well, that we've been talking about since the first day of class, where I've drawn an arterial. That feeds a capillary bed where there's gas exchange. So I'll go red to blue. And at the other end is a vein. Now veins tend to be larger in caliber, and a venule, which collects the blood, it provides less resistance on the other end. Because there's less resistance, more blood tends to flow through, and you filter less in a regular capillary bed. However, in a glomerular setup, it goes after an arterial, blood going in, and you have glomerulus, no gas exchange, and then ether and arterial going out. So it goes arterial, capillary, arterial. Now, the ether and arterial, it provides more resistance, but because it provides more resistance on the way out, that means you're going to filter more through the capillary bed. So, because of this arrangement, filter more. Like what I say on the slide there, you filter your plasma volume 70 times a day. They refer to that as high renal clearance. Okay. If for whatever reason your patient has a catheter in them and a urine bag, and you see that they're not making urine, it's not good. Right? They're not clearing out all the toxins. So the idea of high renal clearance is important. Kidneys produce urine, they're working. It's supposed to be something like 1 ml a minute. Urine production, that's kind of the normal textbook standard, 1 ml a minute. 30 mils every half an hour, 60 per hour, and so forth. Here's a picture of the glomeruli. You can see how extensive they are. They provide a lot of surface area. Now this is a good place to stop. What I want to do is talk about a little bit about Friday. Now, Friday, if you look at your schedule, that's cadaver day.